gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Bigfoots Pad Live. So today we have a very interesting show. We have Paul Papa on the show with us tonight. He wrote a book that we are going to be discussing called Haunted Vegas or Haunted Las Vegas, Famous Phantoms, Creepy Casinos, and Gambling Ghosts. So joining me on the show tonight, I have Tim with me. And I believe Nick is supposed to be coming on at some point, but who knows at this point. But so how are you doing tonight, Tim?
Pretty good. Just had
You sound like a robot. Now you're muted. Oh, what's that? You're still muted, Tim.
Sorry, my computer. Hello. Doing pretty good, and yourself?
Doing good. I was talking to Paul a little bit before the show started. I was going to say, so I guess we'll just jump right into this. I know I hate to ask this right off the bat to you, Paul, but can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what got you started with writing? And I know you have a fiction series that you were working on, or I don't know if you're done with it or.
Sure. What got me started with writing was I was a investigator for one of the hotels, and I used to have to write security reports. And I found out that I kind of had a knack for doing it, and I read a lot. I always wanted to write, and so I thought, well, let me see if I can do that. And so I wrote my first book back in 2009, and it went pretty well. And I've written 12 books since then. So turns out I had a little bit of a knack to write.
Well, I thought it was interesting. You were saying that. Well, I mean, you didn't tell me, but I was reading the back of your book. It was saying that you worked for several casinos and that you've lived in Vegas. Are you like a lifelong resident or just lived here for like a while or?
No, I grew up in Wyoming, and after one too many snowstorms, I strapped a snow shovel on the front of my Jeep and drove until somebody asked me what it was. And I thought,
really?
Well, if they don't know what snow is, that's where I want to live. So, no, I mean, I came to Vegas on purpose, but mainly because there isn't any snow here, and I was pretty done with snow. I came here in '89, and worked at the Sands when I first started the Sands, and then I closed the Sands. I am literally the person who walked around and locked the doors for the final time when we shut the doors.
Oh, that's
pretty cool.
Yeah, and they were filming Con Air during the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they used the hotel to film Con Air. And then I went to the Desert Inn, worked there for 91 days until I got a job offer at New York to be the hotel investigator. And so I took that, and I worked at, I ended my career at New York.
Well, that's pretty cool. So
that's very cool.
Are you retired right now, or do you do something else at the moment, or?
I write full time. I have a couple series. I have one series of it's called I lost my train of thought about my own book.
That's okay. Yeah.
I have a series about a guy from Boston who comes to Las Vegas in the 1950s. It's set in Vegas in the 50s, and his father is in the mob, and so the people in Vegas think he's in the mob, and they think that Boston's trying to muscle in on Las Vegas, and so they give him a lot of grief. It's called Maximum Rossi. He ends up fighting one of the made men from Chicago, and then the made man ends up dead. So Chicago thinks that he killed him, and the cops thinks that he killed him, and everybody kind of thinks that he killed him. And his only alibi is the guy's girlfriend, who knows he didn't kill him, and she's missing. So he has to find her. And I have 3 books in that series, and then I have another series that I call a paranormal noir. It's also set in 1950s Las Vegas, but it's very much on the paranormal side of things. So the guy is kind of a private detective, although not officially, and he ends up getting involved in the things in Las Vegas that go bump in the night, we'll say.
So would you say that, are you like into ghosts and paranormal stuff? Was that like I'm trying to think of the term, not a hobby, but would that be something that you like to study, or would you say that you just wrote about it in your books, or what do you?
Well, I never really had much exposure to it, and then my publisher asked me to write they had a haunted series, and so they had different towns. They had haunted New Orleans and haunted Denver and haunted San Diego and haunted all these places. And they needed somebody to write Haunted Las Vegas, and they asked me if I would do it.
Yeah.
And I said, sure. And it turned out to be really interesting because I'm not a paranormal investigator. I don't know anything about that side of it.
Yeah.
But I got to talk to people who had experiences, and I got to go visit these places that they talked about. And so, and being an investigator, I knew how to talk and get the information from the people, but I didn't investigate the scene. So what I mean by that is I didn't draw any conclusions in the book. I just tell you what people have told me, what I experienced when I was there. I described the place, and then I kind of let the people decide for themselves if they believe in it or not.
I was going to say, go ahead. Oh no, sorry to cut you off.
Well, the book that I have that's a paranormal series, that really started because I loved the show Supernatural that was on TV for a while. Yeah. And I love noir. I'm very into noir. My books are noir. So if you don't know what noir was, think of Maltese Falcon is a very good example of noir. Old 50s movies like that. And one of my favorite authors is Raymond Chandler. And I was watching Supernatural one day, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if Raymond Chandler had written an episode of Supernatural? And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be really cool if he had written all of Supernatural? And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be really cool if I wrote a series like that? So that's how that got started. And that book is called Nightmare. And the character's name, his last name is Mayer, Mayer. And so it's a play on the word nightmare.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I was going to say, I know I forgot to introduce you because Nick kind of came on here a few minutes ago. Okay. I know Nick likes reading books about like old Vegas and stuff. I read them sometimes, but not as much as Nick does.
Yeah, definitely a fan of old Vegas. I love hearing stories from people who have lived here for 30, 40, 50 years and hearing about the good old days.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Well, then you'd love the book that I wrote called Discovering Vintage Las Vegas, because I got to go to all those places, those businesses and homes and places where people had been in business for 40, 50 years and talk to the originals. And then I wrote a book about the places that you could go. They're mostly businesses that you can go to experience old Las Vegas.
I was going to say, I think Tim and Nick, I know they for sure read at least some of your book. I know I read the whole thing. I don't know if they've read all of it, but they are aware of some of the locations. Okay. So I'm going to start. I kind of wrote some questions that I was going to ask you before we kind of get into like the nuts and bolts of the book.
All right.
First thing I was going to ask you, you kind of answered this a minute ago. Do you believe in ghosts, or have you seen a ghost?
I have not seen a ghost, and I would say that I'm open to it. Mm-hmm. So I have experienced things that aren't that seem not logical to have happened.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that there is something beyond this life, and if there is something beyond this life, it would make sense that those worlds would somehow interact or overlap each other.
Yeah.
So I have family members who have seen ghosts, and I have experienced feelings and stuff like that, but I haven't actually seen one myself.
So this one's kind of along the same lines. So I kind of mentioned this to you before the show, but something for our audience I thought I would mention. What makes your book so good, I think, was the fact that you start off with kind of like a story talking about someone's experience at one of these haunted places, and you're kind of wondering, like, where is this going? Like for instance, when you talk about the MGM fire, you're talking about like a waitress that's helping people, and and unless you've lived here or unless you really know, like you look ahead or something, you're wondering like, where is this going? And then you kind of get into the history of the place. You do a really good job setting the story up before you even get to the ghost part of the book, like for each chapter. That's what I think makes it so good.
Thank you. I like to tell stories. I really like history. I don't like history books because I find them rather boring. So my thing is, I think people like history, but they like to be told a story.
Mhm.
So if you can work history into a story, I think it's much more captivating for people, much more interesting for them.
So this is just kind of my curious thing for me. So was there a process you had for as far as which locations you wanted to include in the book and which ones you didn't? Because I know that there's more haunted locations around here than what's in the book, of course. But like, how did you go down like a big list of like all these different places and find out like which ones you wanted to put in there and which ones you didn't?
Well, I had a criteria from the publisher that I had to follow, and I had a certain amount of stories that I could tell, so I couldn't go beyond that number of stories. Also, the publisher wanted places that people could visit, so they could actually go there themselves. So I tried to include places in there that you could actually go visit.
Yeah.
There is one place that I put in there that you can't go visit, but it's such an important part. It just kept coming up in all the stories that I was told that I had to include it, and that's the story
Yeah.
that's called Hell House, which you can't visit because it's a private place.
For sure.
But the other places, for the most part, are places that you could go visit. So it was kind of meant for the person who is maybe not an experienced ghost hunter, but
Mhm.
is kind of on the fringe of, oh, that would be fun to go check it out. Let's go do that. And this kind of tells them how to go do that, and gives them some basic information like, don't trespass, don't bother
Yeah.
people that you shouldn't bother, ask permission in places that you need to ask permission. And it's kind of it's not really even ghost hunting 101. It's like the preparation that you need to go into ghost hunting 101.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's my other thing was for the book, did you track down the witnesses or did they come to you, or like how did you find some of these people?
I went to them mostly.
Mhm.
So I did a lot of research to find out which stories I thought would be most interesting. And
Yeah.
when you're writing the book, you get to put the ones that interest you in there as well.
Mhm.
So I,
Yeah.
of course, I slanted to things that were most interesting to me. And then I went to those places, and then I did some research and found some stories. And so I asked those people if I could visit with them and talk to them about their experiences. Comes in
Nick.
handy to be an
Oh, yeah.
investigator.
Yeah. Nick or Tim, did you have any questions before we start getting into like the book itself before we get started, or?
Oh no, I'm good so far. Oh,
I just wanted to remark, Paul. So you talked about the Hell House. Is that the one that was located across from the ranches out? Not the.
It is the one that was across. It's actually off of aptly named Shadow Lane, which is just off of Charleston by UMC,
Yeah.
which is
Okay,
University Medical Center.
And
the house,
another haunted house I was confusing with. Okay.
Yes, and that house actually shared a back wall with Jerry Lewis.
Oh, wow.
That one said it's called the Plaza House, right? The one you're referring to?
Yes, the Plaza House. So if you were to go west on Charleston and turn left on Shadow Lane and go as far as you could go, it dead ends at Jerry Lewis's house.
I didn't know that. Yeah, we've been mine and Tim's moms worked down there by UMC for like 20 years. I didn't even know that was in there.
Oh yeah, so that's actually an area called the Scotch 80s, and a lot of very rich people and a lot of celebrities lived in that area. And so Jerry Lewis' house is original. The house behind it, the Plaza House, is not original. You can tell as soon as you see it that it's a much more modern house. But they share a wall, so if you were to drive through Jerry's house into his backyard and crash through the wall, you'd be in the backyard of the Hell House.
Well, something for the audience, in case they haven't read the book or they don't know of like Las Vegas, can you describe a little bit about I'm going to say this a lot during the show. Can you describe like the general, like some of the more interesting haunted stories from that location, or like that? Can you describe a little bit of what people experience there?
From the Hell House?
Yeah.
So the Hell House was, the story is that it was a gangster's house. So the mafia bought the house, and it was supposedly a place where you, if the mob was upset with you, they would take you there, and it was like Hotel California. Once you checked in, you did never get to check out again.
Yeah.
And There was supposedly a room in the back that was found on accident by the homeowner, and the room had no windows and no doors except for the one door to access it.
Yeah.
Which he found on accident. It was a sliding door, and he did the old-fashioned, put his towel on a hook, and the hook fell down, and the door opened, and this area had a drain in the middle, and otherwise it was covered in white tile, and that's all that was in there.
Wow.
It was far too big to be a shower, and it certainly wasn't a closet or anything like that.
So do they think there's like bodies on the property somewhere?
They think that the bodies were probably cut up and then or killed there, and then buried out in the desert is the theory behind it. The owner claimed to have been attacked by ghosts, and even they even like came into his body, possessed, I guess is the right word there, and his dog would see things and wouldn't stay there, and they would hear voices. His girlfriend was in the shower and would hear voices, and the guys from Ghost Adventures went there and they did a recording, and they caught a voice that sounded, when you hear those voices, sometimes it's really hard to tell what they really do say.
Yeah, for sure.
But that recording, assuming that it is a real recording, was clear as day saying kill her. And it was when the girlfriend was there. So when I went to that house to look at it, it was abandoned. Well, I shouldn't say abandoned. It was the person was not there anymore. It didn't have a for sale sign. I may or may not have gone on property and looked at the house. And so the walls were completely bare. It was stripped down to the studs. But you could tell the layout because there was plumbing and stuff there. And I was able to find a room that matched the description that I was given about this room.
Yeah.
Being tile and only having an entrance. I didn't see a sliding door to block the entrance. It was completely open, and there was no tile in the room. But like I said, the house was stripped down to its bare bones. It was literally studs and sheathing on the outside wall. So the stories that I was told, there was a room there that matched those stories.
That's cool, though. So I think the guy's name was Chris that you were referring to in the book, right?
Yes.
Did in the book you mentioned that there was like an old lady that they were seeing? They're like a not very nice old lady ghost. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, she was supposedly, I think like maybe an accountant.
Yeah.
She was, because supposedly money was also counted there, and I think she was in charge of counting that money, and she was just not very nice. She didn't seem to like people, and she certainly didn't like people being in that house.
So do they think that it's like the ghosts of the victims of the mob that haunt the location, or the mob themselves, or kind of a mixture?
They think it's the mob that haunts it. And I don't know what makes somebody want to haunt a place. I know that some celebrities that are supposedly haunt different locations have a connection there, and I think it's, from what I've understood from people I've talked to, anybody who haunts a place has some type of connection to it. And so the mob, if this was a hit house, would certainly have a connection to it, and they wouldn't want anybody to be there, and so they would haunt that. Now I do have to say that the house has been revitalized. From, I haven't seen it, but from the photos that were on Zillow, it's gorgeous inside. And the people who own it now have not reported any of the things that were reported in it before.
I know. What do you call it? I could have sworn the house, when you look it up online, it's like yellow. From what I remember, like a yellow.
Yeah,
beige
it's kind of an ochre, but leaning on the side of yellow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's got this big porte-cochere in the front of it. Big round circular driveway with a big porte-cochere in the front of it.
So this one, I know Nick's my co-host Nick's into this. The next one I wanted to refer to was the Tupac ghost stories. I know you mentioned 2 locations in the book. The first one I wanted to mention is, can you mention the shooting story and kind of the basics of how that went down? And then can you mention like what people see when they go in that area?
So, there was a big party, and at the MGM, I think it was a boxing match, and and Tupac got into an altercation with somebody at the boxing match,
Yeah.
and then it ended there, and he went over to Suge Knight's house, and then they both got into a car, and they were driving to go to a different party, and they got to the area of, we have a road called Flamingo, as you know, in case people who aren't from here. There's a road called Flamingo, and then a car came up to him and just shot him and killed him. They never caught who that person was. But most of the time when Tupac is viewed or seen, he's standing on the balcony of Suge Knight's old house, because it's not his house anymore, which is in a completely different location than where Tupac was murdered. So that's where the most of the scene is, and he just stands there.
Do they see Tupac on the corner where he was killed, or mostly just at Suge's house, like Suge Knight's?
It's mostly at Suge's house. From what I saw, or from what I was told, he's mostly there, and he's just seen on the balcony, kind of looking out. He's there, and people look, and you say, "Oh, there's a person up there," and then suddenly the person disappears. The house is in a gated community, so you can't get terribly close to it.
Yeah.
You can see it from the road, and you can see the balcony, and that's where most of the sightings is. I haven't heard too many people talk about him appearing at the place where he was shot, although there have been people that say they saw him there too.
Nick, I know you said that you've always wanted to go by there. I know me and Tim were waiting for you to go by there. We mentioned it like a few years ago. We were thinking about it.
Yeah, I remember we talked about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing it a few years ago on Ghost Adventures. That's how I remember it. That's how I came to mind anyways.
Yeah,
Didn't they think that Suge might have got Tupac killed, or had something to do with it, is what some people say on the internet?
You know, there's all sorts of theories about that, the West Coast gangsters hating the East Coast gangsters, and Suge Knight being involved. One of those, it's kind of like, well, I'm saying my age now, but it's kind of like the Kennedy assassination. There's so many rumors about how it happened or why it happened, and so because we don't know what the truth is, because they never caught the person who killed them, so we don't know what the truth is. So it allows you to believe, whatever story you want to believe, I guess.
I know Nick. When I first met Nick, he used to study the Tupac haunting all the time in Vegas. Do you know anything? Do you have anything else to add, Nick, before we go on to the next part of the book?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that, it is like the Kennedy assassination. I watch videos from time to time where people dissect it down to the dates and the times. And one guy had a video where he said Tupac was still alive, and it wasn't bullets that were shot into the vehicle, but it was squibs that had been planted there before. I'm like, whoa. So it's one of my favorite unsolved murders, probably up there with the Kennedy assassination, because of all the different angles.
Yeah. I would caution, though, if anybody wants to go to the place where he was shot, it's Flamingo, and the other road is called Koval. It's actually Koval Lane, not Koval Road. Mm-hmm. And as you all know, because you're familiar with Vegas, it's a very busy intersection.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go there, just be careful. There's a lot of cars. It's not a place where you're going to go and it's going to be really quiet. It's a pretty busy intersection.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So this one I was going to ask you about, Carluccio's Tivoli Gardens, or Liberace's Tivoli Gardens.
Yes.
So we read about this location a long time ago, probably like the early 2000s when it was still open.
Yes.
I read that they recently restored the restaurant, and they opened it. I want to say it was May of this year. They reopened it. I don't know if it's like for just special events or not, But we got contacted by them asking to do a ghost hunt. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, what, Nick, 5 days ago, maybe? But I haven't heard back from them. They wrote me the initial email. I wrote them back. Now we haven't heard anything. But
well, go do it. If they let you, go do it.
Oh yeah,
because I got to talk to the employees in there, and that's where all those stories in there came from. The employees themselves. Luckily, when I wrote the book, it was still open, and so I sat there with them, and they told me all about it. And people. There's a lot of people who don't know who Liberace is. He was an entertainer who was a master piano player. He just had incredible talent. From a young age, he quickly got better than the people who were teaching him how to play the piano, and the people who were teaching him how to play the piano were good. And he quickly got better than them. But so even the people who know Liberace, many of them don't realize that he was also a very good chef, and he loved to cook. And so he had that restaurant, and at night, after the restaurant closed, it was not at all uncommon for him to throw elaborate parties in there.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say elaborate parties. It was basically he would invite a bunch of people over and he'd cook for them. And
I was going to say, can you describe because I've seen pictures of the inside, but just in case people haven't seen pictures of the inside, could you describe it for some of the hauntings and what the building looks like?
Sure. If you walk in the building, there's a little entry, and then if you keep walking, unless they've remodeled it now, because I haven't been in there since they did open it. You're right, they did open it, and I haven't been back since then. There's this gorgeous bar that Liberace had flown in, and it looks like those bars that you see in the Old West in the saloons. It's just this gorgeous wooden bar. And then to the left of that are seating for the restaurant, and to right of that is a special room in there that's all mirrored, and the bar in there is shaped like a piano, and that seems to be the place where people see him most. They see him in the mirrors. They'll just kind of turn, and he'll suddenly be in the mirrors. And it's like you catch it out of the corner of your eye, and then you look, and Liberace's there, and you think, oh, this must be a picture, and then suddenly he disappears. He likes to play pranks on the staff. At the end of the day, they would take all the stuff on the table, the salt, peppers, and shakers and stuff like that, and fix it the way it's supposed to be, and then he would move it all during the night. But he also had... he was kind of mean a couple times because people would go to the bathroom and he'd lock the doors so that you couldn't get out of the bathroom. I guess he thought that was funny. He'd do it mostly with the women's bathroom. It seemed to happen more than the men's bathroom. They'd lock the door. The big story was, and in real life, he was accused of being homosexual, and he sued the magazine that claimed that he was homosexual, and he won that lawsuit. And so whether he was or not, he lived in a time where it was probably not okay for your career to be homosexual. And so if he was, he protected it very well. And if he wasn't, then of course he protected that. He protected his career as much as he could. And so I talked to the bartender who was bartending one night and talking to her customers about Liberace, and then she said he was homosexual. And shortly after she said that, a bottle came off the top of, I think it was a bottle, came off the top shelf of the bar and crashed down close to where she was. And you could think, well, that's just coincidence. But the bottles on those shelves are not put in like this; they're put in like this. So if this was the front, the bottle would be sitting this way, and that is so that they won't fall out. So the bottle was sitting like this. So for it to come out on its own and just fall is next to impossible. And like I said, I interviewed the lady who was in that story, and that's what she says, is that bottle just came crashing down shortly after she had told that story, or shortly after she had said he was gay.
Well, I know that they were saying that you were mentioning that the room has mirrors all around the place.
Yeah.
Do they have any Liberace memorabilia in there? It's kind of a dumb question, but they don't. I know they had a
No.
museum next door at one point.
No, it's not a dumb question, and I think the reason they don't is because they had that museum next door, so they don't really. There is nothing in that restaurant, which, by the way, is supposedly "I love it" spelled backwards.
Oh
and,
yeah.
And there's nothing in that restaurant that would make you think that has anything to do with Liberace. And Carluccio's are the people who took over the restaurant after he passed. So originally it was not called Carluccio's, but they took over the restaurant. So that's why that portion of the name came onto it.
Well, Nick, I know that you and me had talked about this before. Can you talk about a little bit, Nick, on the theories of ghosts and why they appear in mirrored areas or mirrors specifically?
Well, I've heard several different theories, but the most popular and common one is that mirrors sort of serve as kind of a gateway between our world and any other worlds that might exist. So that's probably why I assume Liberace would appear in the mirrors.
Well, because I know that they were saying that. I know, for instance, if someone's into voodoo or it's like black magic, they say that mirrors they bring energy to the other side or from the other side. And I know for different magic spells, they either point two mirrors towards each other or they take off all the mirrors altogether, depending on what they're trying to do. You ever hear about that? Have you ever heard about that, Paul?
No, no, but I'm fascinated about you guys talking about it.
Yeah, you've heard about it, right, Tim? I know. The only reason I know about it is I watch like a lot of paranormal witness type shows and a lot of paranormal investigating, and a lot of people like mess with the Ouija board, and then they have mirrors all around them, or they move
supposed to be
into a
like
house.
portals.
Yeah, I've seen it where people move into a house on that show, and all the mirrors are torn off the walls, and then when they put the mirrors back up, it like makes whatever bad stuff's in their house comes out and starts terrorizing the family, however you want to word that. Seen that on several episodes. So the next one, I figured while we're on the topic of Vegas entertainers and entertainers living around here, can you talk a little bit about the Redd Foxx house? Because I know this one's actually down kind of by my work.
Yeah, that's my favorite story.
Yeah, we can talk about that one. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So Redd Foxx had a house in Vegas, and he loved that house. It was his pride and joy. Redd Foxx, as many people know, is famous for being on shows like Sanford and Son and some other shows that he was on, or guest appearances that he made. He started out as a comedian. He's a very funny comedian. He's a very filthy comedian, but he's very funny. And he grew up in a time when it was hard to be in show business as a black person. He lived in Las Vegas during the time when black people weren't allowed in the casinos. They could entertain people, but they weren't allowed to be in the casino itself or stay in the casino. And so he had a house that he just truly loved. Redd Foxx was not very good at keeping track of his money. He was not very good at paying his taxes. And so he ended up losing just about everything he owned. The truck for Sanford and Son, he owned that truck. He had it at his house. And IRS people really just came and took everything he owned. And the only thing he was able to keep was his house. And
they took the car from the show too?
Yeah, they took the car from the show. They took everything.
Wow.
But his house, he was able to keep his house. It was the only thing. And so he got on another show called The Royals, I believe. And if you've ever watched the old Sanford and Son TV shows, which was based on a show in England, by the way, his big thing that he would do is he'd clutch his chest and I'm coming. He talked to his dead wife and say, "I'm coming to see you." If something wasn't going his way.
Yeah,
so that was like the big joke of the show. He'd do that, not every episode, but quite frequently. And so what happened is he was on the Royals and he clutched his chest, and people thought he was, being funny, and he wasn't. He was having a heart attack. So he had a heart attack, and he died, and then he was buried. And so his house was sold first to an Elvis impersonator. Well, I don't know if he was the first one, but an Elvis impersonator got the house at some point.
Yeah.
And he used to hear things that there's a pool in the back. The pool is still there, but it hasn't been filled with water for a long, long time. And he would hear parties out there, and he would hear noises, and doors would close. And he ended up getting freaked out and had to leave the house. He just didn't feel comfortable there. So a business opened there, and the same thing would happen. Doors would close, and they'd hear parties out in the pool that, obviously was not filled with water, and it was not used, just sat there. And then sometimes, this is my favorite one, sometimes they would be typing on their computers, and the font would just suddenly turn red.
That's weird, yeah.
And so they ended up holding a seance with a medium, and she, according to them, she got a hold of Redd Foxx, and he said that, I love that house. That house is my pride and joy. And so they basically struck a deal with Redd Foxx that said if they would put lights on the outside of the house and keep them on all night, and they would let people know that this is his house, that he'd stop playing these little pranks on them. So even to this day at night, when you drive by the house, it's all lit up at night. There's spotlights on the front, not spotlights, but there's lighting on the front that lights up the house. And there's a sign on the yard, because it is still owned by a business, although it is now another business. And as you drive up past that house and you see the sign, if you look down in the corner of the sign, no matter which way you're going, there's a little Redd Foxx.
Oh, that's cool though. Yeah.
So it lets people know that this was Redd Foxx's house. And since they've done that, they have not reported any more paranormal activity there.
So the ghost kind of died down with the I mean, I hate to make like a pun, but I guess the activity died down.
Yeah, they were true to their word. They held up their end of the agreement, so he held up his end. So
That's pretty cool.
He's happy that the house, that people know that it's his house, and that it's shining the way that it's supposed to. And it's a very well kept house on the outside.
It is, yeah. We've driven by it before.
Yeah, it's it's an old house. It's an old, I think 70s house, if I'm not mistaken, 60s or 70s. So it's not fancy.
I drove by that house for like 6 or 7 years going to work. I didn't even know what it was until recently.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens. You drive by and you don't even think, because it's in an area where you wouldn't think twice about it. Back when he bought it, there wasn't really anything around it.
It's like right on the main road right there. Yeah. On Eastern.
Yeah, it's right on the main road, right on Eastern. Yeah. And, most of the people back then, like we talked about Jerry Lewis, his house wasn't anything fancy either. During that time, the people that had houses in Vegas, they were nice for their time frame, but they weren't these huge monster mansions that people in California live in nowadays. They were just normal houses, bigger than an average person's house. From the size of Jerry Lewis's house, I'd say it's probably somewhere around between 2,500 and 3,000 square feet. And Redd Foxx's house is probably a little over 2,000 in that area.
I'm kind of surprised if I don't know how popular Eastern was. I'm surprised no one came up and just knocked on the door, because no big fence or anything around it.
Yeah, there's no fence or anything. Yeah. When I went there and investigated, I was walking around the house before I even knocked on the door. Nobody ever stopped me or anything.
Oh, geez,
I just walked around to look at the house to see if the pool was still there. It was the biggest thing I was wondering. But as you know, because you've gone by it, the whole side of the house now is a parking lot.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah,
the front area is desert landscaping, which means there's no grass, and that's just kind of a smaller area. And the whole side of it and the back has been asphalted. Although I don't know why they didn't fill the pool, because the pool is still there. It's just not used. There's no water in it. Yeah.
So the next part I wanted to mention, we're going to talk a little bit about the individual casinos because you mentioned a few that I thought were interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the Las Vegas Hilton and the Elvis sightings?
Well, the Elvis sightings are hilarious. Because Elvis came here in the 50s at the early start of his career when he was billed as the atomic. What was the atomic something? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And he failed miserably because he was on stage with in front of people that were not his target audience, and so he kind of failed miserably. So he was always nervous to come back to Las Vegas, and he came here at the height of his career. There was no reason for him to be nervous. Let's say that. It was at the height of his career, and he went to the Hilton, and he sold out, and he just ended up owning the city, and he was a huge success there. He sold out every show he had, of course, everybody went to see him, and it was a huge success. And so his connection is probably because he was so nervous about coming back that he was so worried that he'd be another failure again in a city that he was a failure at.
Yeah.
That holds some special place to him. So a couple things happen that are pretty interesting. Some people tend to see a big old Cadillac driving outside, and it'll drive like straight into a wall and then of course disappear. So obviously that wall must not have been there when Elvis was here. So he's driving straight. The other thing that happens a lot is he's seen in the so if you don't know casinos have the main elevators that people go into, and just like Disneyland, there's a whole back of the house area, and they have their own elevators so that housekeeping and all those people can get up and down and go where they want to without disturbing the guests. Entertainers would use that when they would go on stage. They'd get in the employees' elevators and they would go down to the backstage so they wouldn't have to walk through the casino either, especially somebody like Elvis who would have been mobbed the moment he tried to do it. And so he's seen on those elevators a lot by people. One a guest room attendant saw him, and he was very polite to her, and then she realized who it was, and she knew that Elvis was dead. And the story is that I did not talk to her, but the story is that she left the elevator, immediately left the hotel, and never came back.
Oh geez, yeah.
Wow.
He also was seen walking on stage, and one of the gentlemen who saw him walk on stage worked there when Elvis was actually performing, and so he knew Elvis pretty well. And so he sees Elvis walk on stage, and he thinks to himself, boy, if that's an Elvis impersonator, he's the best one I've ever seen. And then of course Elvis disappears. He often says hi to people. He had the set of suites at the top of the Hilton, which is now the Westgate. He had the set of suites at the top of there, and he used to he had so much room up there, he used to drive his golf cart around the rooms. And so people see the golf cart every once in a while, or they'll see him up in those suites. People love to stay in those suites to see if they get a chance to see Elvis. But most of his sightings that I've talked to people are either in the employee elevator or the Cadillac that likes to drive into walls and freak people out.
Wow.
Do you know how active the ghost is? Like, do they see it all the time, or?
There are a lot of stories about it, so I don't know if it's like a daily thing or a weekly thing or a monthly thing, but there are plenty of stories of people employees who claim to have seen Elvis while working there.
Well, there's like one story that I was interested in. Wayne Newton.
Yeah, Wayne Newton saw him. Trying to think of that one. He saw him in the audience when he was performing. And Wayne Newton, who everybody knows is known as Mr. Las Vegas, would have been here and would have known Elvis pretty well. And so he says that he saw him while he was performing. And I when I worked in security for a long time, I worked with Wayne Newton. I say with. I worked at the Sands. He performed at the Sands. It was my job to make sure people didn't harass him when he came off stage and stuff. So it's not like I was part of his entourage or anything. But I've talked to Wayne Newton many times. Let me tell you, one of the nicest men in the world. One of the few people who, at the end of every single one of his performances, walked around to the employees that were doing their job to help him and thanked every single one of them. That's
pretty cool. Yeah.
Very nice man. But he claims to have seen Elvis when he was on stage performing.
My thing too, I was wondering was, so do they see Elvis ghosts in like Graceland or somewhere like that, or is it mostly just like at the Hilton? Or
Elvis, people all around Las Vegas claim to see Elvis, and there was a lot of hotels downtown there's one specifically that on their marquee used to say Elvis slept here, and people would claim to see Elvis. You can't walk down the street of Las Vegas and not see Elvis because there's going to be somebody dressed up like him. So I don't know how many people are really seeing Elvis and how many people are wanting to see Elvis. But the ones that seem to be that seem to sound like they really believe they saw Elvis all seem to happen at the Hilton. So that seems to be the main place. And as far as him haunting Graceland, I don't have any idea if he does or not.
Well, you were saying that it's like in the Westgate, would you say, or is it like if
so
if someone wanted to try to get one of those suites, like where would they go to find that?
It's at the Westgate, and you would have to rent the suite because it's off limits. You can't just go up to the suite.
Yeah.
So if you were going into the Westgate Tower, it has so many floors, and then there would be another button that would take you up to the suite. But if you push that button and your key, because you have to swipe your key now, and if you push that button without being able to swipe the key to get you into the suite, you're not going to go up there because they don't want people just going up to that suite. So it's really not one that you can get to.
Yeah.
Unless you want to pay the probably $3,000 a night to stay in the suite.
Oh dang, yeah.
So if
like
you're really a fan,
yeah,
you can try it. But you have to really be a fan.
Because I was thinking about that. I'm like, that sounds cool. I'd like to go check that out. But I didn't know if it was like some kind of like a big penthouse type deal or if it was like I'm guessing it wasn't a regular room, but I was like, I didn't know how big
it's if I'm not mistaken, and unless they remodel, because of course this has been a while and another casino or another corporation has taken over. It used to be literally the top floor of the tower, the entire top floor. Yeah. So the elevator would take him right into his suite. There's no like foyer or hallway. It would take you right up to the suite. When you got off the elevator, you walked into the suite, and it is literally the whole entire top floor, bigger than most people's houses. I think. I was gonna say I thought I might know what the square footage is, but I don't think I do.
Nick, did you have anything to add? It looks like you were going to ask a question a second ago.
Oh, no. Just scratching my arm.
So on the next one, so I have something interesting I was going to ask you about this. So the Luxor Hotel and Casino on the Strip, for the people that are listening that might not know, it's the big pyramid on the Strip. I know that you were mentioned in your book that the Luxor was haunted because there was like a pretty good number of suicides that happened up there. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there seemed to be some suicides when the place was being built, and then after it got open. The weird thing about the Luxor, because it's a pyramid, when you come out of your room, the hallways aren't on the inside like in most hotels. The hallways are on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to go into the Luxor and look up, you would see the hallways. And so when you come out of a room, you're kind of in that hallway, and the only thing that's stopping you from falling to your death is an elaborate system of handrails. And there have been people that have just jumped over that handrail and have fallen to their death. One lady, this family was going to the buffet to eat, and this lady just fell to her death right in front of them.
Jeez.
And another person just climbed up onto the railing and jumped because the angle is, you're going to fall straight down, and it's pretty far. So I did some research on that, and on the Luxor itself, because it's modeled after an existing pyramid in Egypt, and that pyramid had a sphinx guarding the east side and the west side, and that was to make sure that nobody could get into that temple on either side. And they found that when they were doing their archaeological dig, and they could tell that it originally had one on the front and on the back.
Yeah.
And when they built the Luxor, they didn't do that. And so the theory is they left the whole back open to evil spirits because they didn't put a sphinx there to protect it like they did in the front. Now, whether that's true or not, as far as leaving it open to evil spirits, that's up to you to decide. But I know that the pyramid that they modeled it after had that sphinx in the front and the back.
I was gonna say, Nick, I know you're writing me on a private message. You said you wanted to ask Paul a question, Nick?
Yeah. How much detail do you go into your book about the Luxor fire ghosts? I always find those stories very interesting that I hear from people.
Oh, you mean the MGM, Nick? Sorry.
MGM, not Luxor.
I was going to say, I don't remember a fire being at the Luxor. I talk about the fire, and I talk about people seeing ghosts in their rooms. I don't know if I go into a great amount of detail in there, but it's one of the stories that I do talk about. So I do talk about people seeing those ghosts, and especially in their rooms, because as that smoke. So the good thing about the MGM fire, probably the only good thing about the MGM fire, is all those sprinkler heads that you see in your room when you go into a hotel are because of the MGM fire. So those federal law mandated those after that fire because of the devastation. And then what happened was, as that smoke rose, it filled rooms, and those old in Vegas, you can't just go and open your windows in a hotel. You can't just go over to the window and open it up and get fresh air. Because for whatever reason, and so those places were filling with rooms filling with smoke, and people were trying to stop the smoke. A lot of people died in their rooms from smoke inhalation. Others just decided, we're just going to jump. It would be better just to jump than to die in the room. And of course, they died too. So a lot of people died in that disaster. And so people see what is common is people will go into a room and they'll see somebody laying on the bed, and it was apparently somebody, or you would think it's somebody who died in that room on the bed. So that's what you see. That's what is reported most often. Not things. The ghosts there don't seem to interact with the people as much as people just see them.
So what's your opinion on how come some ghosts seem to be intelligent and interact with like present modern times, and other ones seem to not even notice that people are around?
Well, that's a really good question. Probably better answered by somebody much smarter than I am, because I don't know. Maybe some ghosts just don't like people, or I don't know. I know that there's seems to be certain things that tie people to different places. For example, if Elvis is at the Westgate, the old Hilton, that's not where he lived.
Yeah.
But some reason that tied to him. Other actors who haven't, or performers who are tied here, didn't always live here. They lived somewhere else, but there was something that tied them there. It seems to me that things like at the MGM, that was a huge disaster. It wasn't just somebody died there. It was they died there because of this this terrible incident, and maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. I'm just saying things that pop into my head at this point because I don't know if it's true or not.
Here's another one I thought was interesting. You talked about the is it Moulin Rouge or Moulin Rouge? The Moulin
Rouge. Yeah.
Yes. So you mentioned that there was a jazz musician or musicians that haunt the former location of the hotel.
Yes.
So the hotel, for those who are watching that don't know Vegas, so the hotel is gone. They got rid of it years ago. But you said that there's still people hear things or see things on the property. I don't know if there's a building there nowadays or not, but
there is nothing there. So Moulin Rouge, Moulin means windmill, Rouge means red. It's French. There is an actual very famous nightclub in France called the Moulin Rouge, and that's what this one was named after. Is that and the Moulin Rouge was the first non-segregated casino in Las Vegas. So when it opened up, it welcomed everybody to come, and it was on what's called the west side of town, which was where most of the black people had houses and were kind of made to live on that part of town. There's a whole history about that side and how it came to be, which I can tell you some other time if you want. But so if you go to find where the Moulin Rouge was, there is a sign there. It's not the original sign. The Moulin Rouge burnt down. It caught on fire several times, and it finally burnt down and was destroyed. So it's basically just a lot. It's an empty lot. There's nothing there. And what people report hearing at night mostly is a sax player. They hear saxophone music as they walk by it, and there's nowhere there that you would have saxophone music coming out. There's no clubs or anything in that area that would produce saxophone music. The story is that that this guy, and his name is Carl Wendell Gray, and I actually write about him in, I told you that series that I have with Rosie, my not the paranormal series, but the other one. I actually write about him in the third book called Rosie's Risk.
Yeah.
But what happened was he was on a balcony, and there was a big party after one of the shows, and he was on the balcony, and everybody kind of came out on the balcony, and he was right at the end, and he unfortunately got pushed closer and closer to the edge, and then got pushed over the edge and died.
Oh, geez, yeah.
That is the story that is told. There is nothing in the newspapers or anything that supports that story. I wasn't able to find out anything other than the person's name who was supposedly this happened to. That person is a real person.
Yeah.
That I was able to track down, that he is a real person. But I couldn't find anything that said about somebody falling off a balcony and dying at the Moulin Rouge. And the Moulin Rouge wasn't open very long.
Here's my question. This is not really like a right or wrong answer to this. This is kind of just to get your opinion. What do you think would happen if you built a new building on that lot? Would that building be haunted, or would the ghosts go away? Or
well, they have tried to open that place several times, and they have tried to do things, and every time they do it, something bad happens, and it's typically a fire. That place is caught on fire several times.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds like it's jinxed.
It does sound like it's jinxed. It first went under, bankruptcy, and then it shortly after that caught on fire, and then they tried to revitalize it, and it caught on fire again, and they tried to revitalize it another time after that, and it caught on fire. But you also have to know that especially in Las Vegas, anytime you have an abandoned building sit there for too long, you get homeless people inside of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're not always as careful as other people. And so I'm not saying that they started fires, but things like that can happen.
So here's my question. Well, not really a question. This story I thought was very interesting. It's something I have never heard about. Can you talk about Stony the elephant? I know Tim and Nick. I wanted to hear this story.
So this, you can actually look on the internet and find, if you want to, but I'll warn you, you can actually go on the internet and you can hear the story that I'm about to tell you. You can actually hear Stoney. So what happened is Stoney was an elephant, and he worked in a show here in town, and he unfortunately wasn't treated very well, and then his owner that he was attached to, I just say he just wasn't a nice guy, and Stoney ended up injuring his leg, and there's a point where they were having to support him. He's a big elephant, and so they were trying to support him, and they put him down on his leg, and he cried out, and that's the video you can find online of Stoney crying out. It's not a pleasant video to hear if you're so inclined, but it is out there. And they ended up having to put him down. And so there is a very famous cemetery here in Las Vegas where stars would bury their animals.
Yeah.
And so Stoney is buried in that cemetery. And he is often seen just walking around the cemetery.
That's cool. I was going to say, have you ever heard of that one, Tim? I never heard of it before I read the book.
No, actually, I have not. No.
Yeah, it's a pretty tragic story because, he was used in this show, and then it was kind of like, well, when we're done with him, kind of toss him aside, and he had a very sad ending. It's animals like that, like horses. They're so big that if they break a limb, it's not like they can just lay on their side like we do, or lay in bed or have a cast, and they can't put any weight on that until it heals, and that means that you've got to somehow support them. So they kind of put him in one of those cages that squeeze the side to hold him up.
Yeah.
It just didn't work. He was just it was kind of like torture to him, and you can tell it's heartbreaking to listen to that video of him crying out like that, because you can just tell he's just in terrible pain.
Oh yeah.
So they did eventually put him down, and he likes to walk around the graveyard.
I was gonna say, have you heard about that one, Nick? Stoney the elephant at was it the Craig Road Pet Cemetery? Is that where it was?
Yes, I think that is right. Yes, I think it's a Craig Road Pet Cemetery.
You ever heard of that one, Nick? There's a ghost of one of the show animals. It used to be it was an elephant that they see there.
I did hear about it a long time ago, and I don't think I heard the story like Paul just told it. I just heard kind of a snippet saying, "Oh yeah, there's an elephant ghost that walks around in North Las Vegas." That's the extent of the story that I heard. Yeah, it's off Craig, and back when MySpace was a thing, he had his own MySpace page. He doesn't have a Facebook page, but he had a MySpace page, and you can go to the cemetery and you can find his grave, and it's not just night that he's seen walking. He walks around during the day too.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I was gonna say, you don't really hear a lot of stories about like pet ghosts. I know you mentioned the Boulder City Pet Cemetery in there, but we have about 20 minutes left in our show, so I'm gonna try to ask you about a couple, 2 or 3 more places, and then I had a couple other questions I was gonna ask you. Okay. You talked about a few haunted schools in your book. You talked about a guy named Mr. Petrie or Petrie. He is at the old Las Vegas High School. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to, how you pronounce that last name. I have always called it Petrie, but that was because I grew up with the Dick Van Dyke Show, and that was his last name in the show. It was Robert Petrie, so that's why I've always gone with Petrie. But some people say Petrie, and some people say Petrie. So the story is that he was once a teacher there, and he kind of catches people who are skipping class, but he seems to hang out in the theater. that they have there. That school, if you haven't seen it, is a gorgeous school. It's Art Deco. It was the first high school in Las Vegas. There's all sorts of controversy when it was built because it's on 7th Street now. Remember that? Because there's all sorts of controversy about it being so far outside of town, and it's on 7th Street. So it tells you how small Las Vegas was at the time that they built this thing. Gorgeous, gorgeous school. It's a performing arts school now. So they have this theater, and he likes to hang out there. And if you skip class and hang out there, he will come up and he'll spook you to get you to go to class. And the way he spooks you is he comes up, and then you realize he's floating. He's not touching the ground. And people get a little freaked out. He also likes to turn lights on and off. Basically up in the catwalk, he likes to mess with those lights. So he's a friendly ghost. He's never done anything bad to people, but he likes to turn the lights on and off, and he likes to make sure that people are in their rooms. Now, saying that, there is no record of a teacher with his last name having ever worked at that school. But all the kids know him. There are multiple sightings of him, and he's almost like the unofficial school mascot.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So it's almost considered an honor now if you're in that school and you see Mr. Petrie. Or Petrie, however you want to pronounce it.
Oh, yeah. This one I thought was a little weird. So you mentioned that there's a school where there's I don't call it a legend, or if there's people have seen it. There's a janitor that has blood on his hands that people have seen. Can you mention that story briefly?
Yeah, he seems to follow kids home, and nobody really knows. He doesn't do anything to them. He just kind of follows them home, and of course they get all freaked out because he's got blood on his hands, but he looks like the janitor, and so they think he's from the school, and they'll see him walking kids home. And as weird as it is, it almost kind of feels like he's making sure they get home safely, because he doesn't ever do anything to them. But you turn around and here's this guy with blood on his hands following you, and it's a little creepy.
Yeah. Here's one thing I kind of wanted to mention. We were talking about it a little bit before the show. You mentioned that Dennis McBride went through the Boulder Dam Hotel at one point with the psychic. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Dennis is the curator for the State Museum right now, and he used to be the curator for the hotel, because the hotel has a museum inside it, and so he was the curator for that museum at the time. And there's so many stories about the hotel being haunted, and so he decided to take a psychic and walk through there, and she seemed to be okay until she got down into the basement, and then she felt that there was just some evilness there and some bad feelings. There were some places that she refused to go to, and she just said that she had felt that bad things happened there. There's no record of any bad things happening in that hotel. That hotel actually has a really fascinating history, but it did sit abandoned for quite a while. And one of the people who was prominent in making that hotel happen did end up killing himself. He ended up jumping off cliffs into the lake and killing himself. But that's about the only thing that nefarious that I can find in history that's associated with that hotel. That hotel has a list a mile long of dignitaries and famous people that have stayed there, including Shirley Temple.
Oh, yeah. So I have something I was going to show you real quick. I'm going to share my screen here. We actually did a ghost hunt there. What was it? Roughly about 10 years ago at this point.
Been a couple times, but yeah.
Yeah.
Been a while.
Let me make my screen bigger. So me, Tim, and our old friend, we were staying there. We were doing a ghost hunt, and then we decided to let the cameras tape the room while we were sleeping. You're going to look in this area right here. This is our old camera system. And we were sleeping, right? No one was awake when this was going on. See that shadow? Like someone looked over the bed while we were sleeping.
Yeah.
I was like, that's probably one of the best pieces of ghost footage I've ever seen, like from that location.
Yeah.
This was, like I said, probably about 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. So I was going to say, what do you think of that, Paul? I was going to say, that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. It wouldn't surprise me for there to be ghosts in that hotel because the whole Boulder City has a very fascinating history. I've actually written a book about Boulder City as well because there's all sorts of books written about the dam, but nobody had ever written a book about the city itself. And the city is just absolutely fascinating. And that was the first hotel that was built there, and its ownership has had kind of a checkered past with it trying to make it and trying to survive.
Oh yeah.
And it eventually did. It's open. You can stay in the hotel now. It's a gorgeous hotel. It's one of my favorite places to be when I'm in Boulder City. Has a nice restaurant in it too. And I spent a lot of time downstairs when I was researching that book about Boulder City. A lot of time in that basement, and I never saw anything or felt anything out of the ordinary there. But it wouldn't surprise me because there's so many famous people that have been to that town, and that hotel was the center of the thriving center of the city for a long time. So I'm sure that there was a lot of parties and a lot of fun activities that happened there. And so if you were a ghost and you wanted to hang out somewhere, it wouldn't be a bad place to hang out.
Oh yeah, for sure. So for the last 10 or 15 minutes of the show, I kind of have some questions that are kind of all over the place.
Okay.
The first one. So did your opinion on ghosts or the paranormal change at all before you wrote the book and afterwards?
I wouldn't say my opinion on ghosts or paranormal changed. I would say that the best thing about the book is it allowed me to take a look at my city in a way that I had never looked at it before. So usually you come to Vegas and you see it a certain way, and most people only see casinos. They don't understand all the other things that you can do in Las Vegas that have nothing at all to do with the Strip or the other areas.
Oh yeah.
And I love to talk to people, and so I got to talk to people and share their experiences about something outside of the norm in Las Vegas. And I also got to find out that Las Vegas is considered one of the most haunted cities in America, which I had no idea.
Oh yeah, me neither.
Yeah, so it didn't really change my view of ghosts or paranormal activity, but it allowed me to see a side of my city that I hadn't seen before, and that was wonderful.
Next one I was wondering. So after reading about all these haunted hotels and things that happen, I know you worked at some. Has writing this book changed your mind or made you want to ever go stay at a haunted hotel, either looking for a ghost or maybe just to get the experience?
Well, I actually have stayed at a haunted hotel, but it was not in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah.
It was in Arizona, in Jerome, Arizona, which is a tiny little town up from Sedona, that is literally on the side of a mountain. And Jerome has a hotel there that is supposedly haunted, and my wife and I stayed there in that hotel that night. So we didn't have any experiences, but that night, a person in a room next to us did say that she had an experience. She ended up seeing something in her room.
So my next thing I was wondering, so I know you said that you have never been on like a ghost hunt or like a paranormal investigation, whatever you want to call it. Would you ever go on one, or is that not really something you'd be interested in?
No, I think it'd be fun. I am all about learning new things and experiencing new things. And, there's a lot of things that happen in the world that are not entirely explainable. And so I think it would be interesting. It'd probably be a little spooky because those things seem to happen mostly in the evening.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's on purpose because of a certain time frame. It's easier to see ghosts or not, but I think it'd be fun.
So I got 2 or 3 more questions. This one, it says, I wrote, Do you think that all of the building construction or demolition that happens around Vegas affects any of the ghosts in the hotels? Like people say that ghosts don't like remodels, or they don't like when people change their environment. So like, what's your take on that? As far as like, I think when I wrote the question, I was referring to like the bigger hotels. Like, for instance, they have the Elvis suite that you mentioned. So if they were to like cut that up into small suites, or if they were to, I don't know, remodel the walls and things, do you think that that would make the ghosts either more active, or would it make them either go away?
Well, that's a good question. There's two things. One, naturally, you'd think, well, yeah, it might make them really mad.
Yeah.
But at the same time, anybody who's been in Las Vegas any amount of time knows that we change things like most people change their underwear.
Yeah.
So I would refer to Bugsy Siegel, who is seen frequently at the Flamingo. Mm-hmm. And the Flamingo has undergone many changes since he was there, and he still seems to hang out there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like those changes has bothered him any. He still hangs out in that area mm-hmm. where the monument is to him, and he also is one of those ghosts who, although he apparently wasn't a very nice person in real life,
yeah.
He was a mobster and killed people. He seems to be a very pleasant ghost.
Oh yeah,
doesn't bother people at all. So that place has changed a lot, and he still haunts it. So I don't know. Maybe it depends on the ghost.
So you mentioned that you have I don't know if call it. I'm trying to think of the term. You have a long history of living in Las Vegas, and you were mentioning that you worked for several hotels and had all these experiences. Would you say that you think you're going to live in Vegas forever? Like, would you say that you're like a lifelong Las Vegan, or would you be interested in moving somewhere else? This is kind of unrelated to the ghost stuff.
Sure. No, I love Las Vegas. I love Las Vegas. I don't see myself moving here unless something were to happen. And, and you can't foresee the future, but as far as I have plans, I do not plan on leaving Las Vegas. I love it here. There's so much to do that has little to do with the side of Vegas that most tourists see. I'm an avid mountain biker, and I kayak and I hike, and people don't realize that we're surrounded by BLM land. There's over 500 miles of mountain bike trails that unfortunately people don't even know exist, or most people don't know exist. And there's places to kayak that aren't specifically on Lake Mead, places to go, and there's all sorts of hiking trails. There's just a lot of things to do here in Las Vegas, and concerts and gatherings and wine tastings and all sorts of fun stuff that are associated with cities.
That's so true.
Would you say there's going to be a book number 2 for your? Would you say you're writing multiple haunted books, or is it just like a one-time thing? You're just going to write the one, or?
Well, I just updated that book, so it just came out. I added 3 new stories to it, and then I updated some of the other stories in there. For example, Bonnie Springs was in the original. It's still in this one, but you can't visit Bonnie Springs anymore because it's no longer there. So I updated things like that. I probably won't write another haunted book, but my paranormal noir will deal with that stuff.
Yeah.
As it relates to Las Vegas. So I will still be writing about it. I just won't be writing about it as a haunted book.
Very cool.
Yeah. My last question I have are, you kind of answered this earlier. So what are some of your upcoming book projects that you would like to mention to the audience?
So I have my series that follows my I want to say private investigator, but he's not. What happens is my character Maximum in the Maximum Rossi book, he ends up getting offered a job to be the house detective for the Sands.
Yeah.
In the 1950s, and so I have 3 books in that series, and then I have my paranormal noir. And I have 1 book in that series, but I'll be releasing 2 books shortly. So my next 2 projects are the paranormal noir. I already have the ideas in my head and what I'm going to do. And so I just have to sit down and write them now.
The last thing I wanted to ask, I know I've been putting it up on the screen. is there any specific websites you want to tell the audience to check out some of your books, or is there any certain place where they could go to find your books?
Well, the best way to find my books is to go on my website, which, as you've been putting it up there, it's simply my name, paulwpapa.com. I have profiles on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and things like that, but the best way to keep up with me is to go on there. And if you really want to keep up with me, when you go on my website, click on the subscribe button and you'll subscribe to my newsletter, and then I will send you information every month, and you'll know when I have new releases or what I'm doing, and different stories. I typically send out a story with my newsletter. I don't just say, hey, here I am, buy my book. I send you a story about Las Vegas so that you can learn a little bit more about the town, and so you get a little bit of information about the town I write in.
Well, I know sorry, I'm looking at something real quick. We added you on Facebook. Could you mention your Facebook to the audience real quick?
So my writing is always done with my middle initial. So my Facebook is, you can find me at Paul W. Papa, and Papa is it's very simple. It's PAPA. People like to make that name more complicated than it is. But it's really just PAPA. It doesn't stand for father, which most people think it does. It's Italian actually for Pope. So you are speaking with Pope Paul, in case you're wondering. But yeah, you can find me on my Facebook page. You can also join the group, The Adventures of Max Rossi, if you want to stay up with that series of books. And I'll probably have another page for the Nightmare, or I might morph the two into one. I haven't decided about that yet, but Facebook is easy to find me at paulwpapa.com, not .com, but on Facebook.
Alrighty, so we are running out of time for tonight. So I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight, Paul. We'll probably have you back on for your noir series here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I know Nick had to go a little bit early, but I know he was interested. He's texting us right now. Again, you guys should go check out Paul Papa's books. Like I said, he wrote the Haunted Vegas book that we were just talking about. He has a fiction series, like he was talking about, based in the 1950s that's really popular. Again, I don't know if you would be willing to go on a ghost hunt. You said you were. We'll extend that to you when we start going out again, because we used to go out all the time about a year or two ago.
Okay.
So I'll send you an email about that when we go out, see if you're available or if you want to tag along.
Yeah, please do. I would. Yeah, please do. I would love that.
Anyways, so like I said, we'll definitely keep in touch, Paul. Thanks for coming on the show, and I wanted to thank the audience for tuning in tonight. And we will be back next weekend with a different episode. We're not really sure what we're talking about next week, but we'll figure it out, and we'll tell you guys during the week. Thanks again, Paul, and I want to say good night.
Oh, good night, and thank you. I appreciate it very much.
No problem.